Good morning. It is December 21st, 2025, in the Sodessa Wesleyan Church, and it's our journey through the Bible. And we're going to continue our study here. And notice that a lot of scriptures that I put out there. So we're going to kind of do a quick dive in some scriptures. So, where we are in history, the nation of Judah is the last remaining remnant of people who were blessed by God through the covenant that He established with Abraham. Remember, way back towards the early days of the study about how God chose Abraham. Abraham had, didn't approach God. God chose him, and this whole concept of covenant, and established a covenant. So I will establish a great people through you, and I will bless you greatly. And that eventually developed into his descendants, and then developed into what we would call the children of Israel, and eventually the nation of Israel, and then they split. And a few weeks ago, we talked about how the nation of Israel just, fell so far away from God that they abandoned God, and He allowed them to be destroyed by the Assyrians. So we have the nation of Judah is really this last remnant of the covenant between God and His people. And so, under King Hezekiah of Judah and the prophetic guidance of Isaiah and other prophets and other priests, Judah came to a point which is amazing when you think about it, that not only were they peaceful, but it was thriving. Think about this, that you had the Assyrians who were bloodthirsty about conquering the known world and were very successful of it. But yet, when they attempted to conquer Jerusalem, 3 years of a siege, and humanly speaking, the reason why they survived that siege was because of water. That if you have clean water, you're going to at least thrive, and that helps disease not to spread. And Hezekiah, just before this, through his foresight that I believe that God gave him, looked at the mountains where the springs were that the people would go and bring water in. And he literally, I can't remember how long it was, but it was miles of cave through solid rock. Think about this. You know, 5,000, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, they chiseled miles of caves and had an underground aqueduct. We talk about how we see, if you look around Italy and Central Europe, you'll see evidence of the Romans aqueducts. These man-made rivers, that bring water into the city. Well, Hezekiah brought it through cave, this long tunnel into the city. So the enemy couldn't stop it up. They couldn't poison it. And so that's what allowed them, allowed them to survive for 3 years. And all of a sudden, a civil war started in Assyria. So the Assyrians pulled back. So, and then you have the Egyptians who would love to control that area, and they were kept. So Israel was in a very good place. That it was thriving. It was, returning to its spiritual roots. Around 697 BC, Hezekiah would die, and his son Manasseh would reign for 10 years as co-regent with his father. And then he came to power at his father's death, alone as king. And he was the opposite type of leader. You thought I was going to say, oh, he continued the heritage, he continued the lessons, and having 10 years of education. Not how sometimes, if you remember, I know, again, this is the history nut in me, that when Edward VII, rescinded the throne, his brother, George IV, really had no training. No one expected him to become king, and all of a sudden, bam, he's king, and not just king, he's in an economic turmoil of the country. He's got the Irish who are not happy with their English overlords. He's got this dude with a funny mustache yelling and screaming in Germany about conquering the world. He's got people saying, that guy Stalin in Russia's got a really good idea. Let's just kill the kings, and control the world. And also, George is popped in there with no training, nothing, no expectation other than his brother said, "Hey, I don't want to be king anymore. It's yours," and walks away. And so you would think, so what George did is he took Elizabeth and he said, "Someday you will be queen." And he trained her and prepared her. Now, you will see some modern histories that'll say, "Oh, well, he didn't really train her." Yeah, he did. He just didn't say to her, "Hey, I have lung cancer. I'm going to die here in a few years. You're going to be queen." She wasn't prepared to take over the kingship so quickly, or the role of queen so quickly. So you would think that Hezekiah and Manasseh would have seen all that his father had done, seen, "Hey, look at the blessings. Look at our strength is when we do the right thing. Let's do it." Well, he didn't. Historians, whether they're Jewish historians or not, say during this reign of Manasseh is the darkest period that Judah ever went through. And they agree in 2 Kings 21:11 that, this certainly was. In verses 1 through 9, look what he does here. He rejection of God by purposeful idolatry. It wasn't that he, kind of became a little lukewarm or a little, "Oh, okay, it's all right if we have these." He brings in, now again, remember, these two countries, Israel and Judah, probably their border is very much like ours in Canada, kind of very fluid, back and forth. So people traveled, news carried. And, why did God allow Israel to be destroyed? Because they went and brought in idolatries and set them up and created religions and encouraged, the people to reject God. So what does Manasseh do? He does the same thing. He doesn't just tolerate these false religions. He goes full bore. He says, "Hey, the Assyrians are so powerful, and look at the God they're worshiping, so let's worship the same God," instead of staying faithful. Look down at second, farther there, verse 16. The people who disagreed with Manasseh, he killed. Again, the ordained purpose of a king is to protect everyone, to provide protection. And those who disagreed with him, those who said, "No, we should stay true to the God Yahweh," he killed. And so much that the writer here says that he shed more Jewish blood than he did foreign blood. Now, he fought wars, but think about that. He killed more people that he was supposed to protect, people who claimed for him to be king, than his enemies. Jewish tradition states that he even had Isaiah killed by sawing him in half in front of all the people. That he went and started killing the prophets. Now remember, this is not something new. Remember what Jezebel said to Elijah, that, "Far be it from me if I don't do to you what you did to the prophets of Baal. You put my prophets to death, I'm going to kill you." Now, did she ever succeed in that? No, God protected her. But Manasseh, Isaiah, who foretold Israel is going to be destroyed and was true, who was a great advisor to his father, who said to the people, "We need to return to God," Manasseh had him killed. And we also see, if you go into Hebrews 11, where you see this great sermon on people who are faithfulness, and you see that reference there, that Jewish and Christian historians believe that was a reference. That Manasseh, use this way of death to silence the prophets. If you look at 2 Chronicles 33:11, it states that he was eventually exiled to Babylon. That friendship that his father had started disobediently became changed for Manasseh. You remember Hezekiah, the height of his power through God's grace. These guys from Babylon show up far off. They were kind of fighting the Assyrians and being kind of a thorn on the side of the Assyrians, but all of a sudden the Babylonians come in. And these guys, and remember we talked about the Magi, same part of the world, okay, who brought gifts to Jesus. Now the Bible doesn't tell us so much, but when you come visit another king from a nation, you usually bring gifts. So they probably brought great riches from Babylon. And they said, hey, we've heard about your reputation. We heard about how you were close to death and your God, healed you. And Hezekiah went, oh, wait a minute. Why are these guys here? They've been taking Assyrian territory and they kind of want to conquer the world just like the Assyrians. And yeah, I don't know. I'm going to kind of handle them with kid gloves. I don't want to tick them off, but at the same time, I don't want to, embrace them, right? Hezekiah opened his treasuries. Now think about it. You got somebody who's, greedy, somebody who wants riches, somebody who wants to conquer land, and you open up your treasury. Say, look at all my riches. Look at my temple. Remember when we talked about the building of the temple, how the precious jewels and the precious metals, gold, gold walls. Think about that. That the temple probably was similar to our sanctuary here. Think about that for a minute. Gold walls, jewels, bronze, which was another precious, solid bronze lampstands, and all this beauty. He shows him the temple. He shows him, his own castle that he had refurbished and added on to that Solomon already built. He showed him all of his military might. And these guys, oh wow, that's really nice, Hezekiah. You're a great guy. So Manasseh said, hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it says here that he was exiled. We believe what he did is he showed up to the Babylonians and said, hey, I'm going to come visit you like you visited my father, and let's sign a treaty. And the Babylonians said, good, here, guess what? You're not leaving. And all of a sudden, maybe they sent a ruler, or maybe they said, hey, be nice to us, Judah, or your king's gonna, pay the price of it. But at the same time, there was a remnant in Judah who didn't really agree with the king sawing prophets in half and putting people to death and setting up idols. And they were happy. Hey, we got rid of the king. Cool. And so they were trying to gain control. So that is fact. Now here's the problem. Biblical critiques, those guys that I'm very critical of. The biblical critics say it's impossible. The Babylonian Empire didn't rise to power during Manasseh's life. The Assyria was still a power to be. But for 16 years during the period of Manasseh, the Assyrians and the Babylonians came to an agreement. Our king will rule both empires. And then when he dies, your king will rule both empires. And both of our armies will kind of fight together and we'll trade together and we'll share strategy. You don't attack me, I don't attack you. Kind of like the Cold War. Russia and the United States really didn't want to go out full bore war to each other because, who's going to win this? Neither of us. All right, let's just kind of tolerate each other, get along. So that was what was going on. So Manasseh kind of all of a sudden threw his dice in with the Babylonians and all of a sudden realized the Assyrians, hey, let's just, keep this guy captive. And for some reason, he was allowed to return. Maybe he got, we talk about, in communism, these re-education camps. Maybe that's what, Manasseh went through. Finally, he decided, okay, the Babylonians, I will do what the Babylonians say. They are really great guys and whatever. He comes home and he eventually dies there. Now, we're not for sure, again, because the Chronicles don't talk about it, Kings don't talk about it, but it's believed that he died in his sleep or he was helped to die in his sleep. Not really for sure, but the writers kind of gloss over that. Because again, are you going to write in the history of the king, I, Joe of Bethlehem, killed the king. He deserved it? No, probably not. That, so we're not really for sure what led to that. But so Manasseh dies. And then along comes the son Amon. Now again, grandfather Hezekiah. Country was good. Country was powerful. Country was prosperous because they were following God. Country starting to fall off the edge. Babylonians kind of control us. The Assyrians want to destroy us just like they did our brother nation Israel. The Egyptians are marching through our land unhindered to go north to fight. The Persians, which were the descendants of all those Arab tribes we talked about, are starting to solidify. And they're starting to look, that desert's not that hard to cross. And let's attack some tradespeople and let's start taking land. So you would think that Amon would realize all the stuff, where we were, where we are, and we should get back there, right? Nope. Amon was assassinated after just 2 years of being on the throne. Again, that's the 2 Kings 21:19 through 25. The reason was that, like his father, he was abandoning Yahweh in Hebrew tradition and heritage in order to appease the evil that is threatening the nation. But the history, we were kind of talking about this earlier, that the more you try to appease evil, the more you compromise. The more you compromise, the more you become. Yes, it's so much more challenging and harder to stand against a wrong and to object to it. But the more you compromise, the more you will be forced to compromise, and the more you're forced to accept that compromise, and so on and so on. Modern example. Hitler in 1923 wrote this book, Mein Kampf. It outlined everything that he was going to do if he ever came to power. 1932, 11 years later, he was in power. Okay, so his plan's already there. Well, the Jews, kind of bad people. They control all the money. So let's take some of the money from them. And the people said, well, okay, I'm not a Jew. Well, and, well, the Jews want to overthrow me. So let's throw some of them in jail. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. And let's take them off to these labor camps and force all these rich Jews to work just like the common man. And I said, okay, well, yeah, cool. And once, the people said, well, wait a minute. All of a sudden in the middle of the night, these soldiers and Gestapo are coming in and taking my neighbors. And, they're disappearing. And where are they gone? See, what happened in Germany wasn't like one day Hitler said, I'm going to build all these concentration camps and everybody who's Jewish I'm going to kill. Yes, in his autobiography, he wrote that plan. The people of the time, vast majority of them, it was a bestseller. Keep this in mind, folks. It was a bestseller in Germany. People read this and went, this guy's crazy. Okay, so he's a little hateful. So he doesn't really like Jews. He doesn't like communists. He thinks, okay, he's not. Nobody can be that bad. That the people of Germany, the promise of military restoration, of political restoration, of economic restoration, of righting what they perceived was the wrongs inflicted on them. Little by little, they compromised and didn't stand up and say what you're doing is wrong until all of a sudden they had the audacity when the Allies would come in and find these concentration camps with villages, miles. Some of these villages, they could smell the burning flesh of the other. They could smell the rotting flesh. They saw the trains filled with people coming through their villages. How could you allow that to happen? We didn't know that happened. Alone. Poor excuse. My point is, let's add that to our Christian life. We see evil around us, folks. Very loud. It has great advertising. Not just to entice, but also to silence you. That's all it wants. Shut up. Don't disagree with us. Just go. Well, that's what Manasseh did. He finds himself wearing a crown and sitting in a dungeon in Babylon. That the people allowed compromise more and more and more. And what happened in Israel? They were destroyed. The same thing in our own spiritual life. The more and more we compromise, or we become the silent majority. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be yelled at. I don't want to be screamed at. I don't want to be discriminated against. Well, let's just all know that's the enticement of sinfulness. So let's learn from Judah. Stand for what's right. No, it's not easy. Yes, it's disruptive. But stand for what's right. Because the more and more you compromise, the more and more like evil you become, the less and less you're God's. And then one day you wake up and you're no different. You're no different than Hitler. You're no different than Stalin. Because you tolerate that, you're just as guilty. Another good movie to watch, I shouldn't say another, a good movie to watch is Nuremberg. It's coming out here soon. I've seen clips of it. That those of you who grew up World War II, but it talks about the Nuremberg trial and these leaders during on down. These leaders who were left alive, who were captured. The audacity to say, it was Hitler's fault. We did nothing wrong. We did absolutely nothing wrong. And this is a lesson for us because we see this in our world. And as you get to what we believe is the end times, we call this as Christians, we're going to be challenged with this. Of either we tolerate evil and give up our souls, or we stand against it. We may lose our lives, but our eternal soul is safe. We may bring others to God at the same time. All right, enough of that lecture. So, Amon's assassinated. Josiah succeeds him as king. And let me read to you, because again, these guys in the this Bible that we're using say it a lot better than I can. So 684, if you have our Bible here that we've been using, the chronological Bible, and it's titled Transition. Josiah, religious reformer. So the king of Assyria died in 681 BC, a few years after Hezekiah. His reign ended violently when some of his own sons assassinated him, and he was replaced by another son. Under that son and that successor, 668, 627 BC, Assyria was at its peak of power. These kings even conquered Egypt, something that no Mesopotamian power had ever done before. Esarhaddon captured Memphis in 671 BC and then captured again and Thebes in 664. Now, what does that mean to us? I'm going to pause right there. Memphis in the Egyptian kingdom was way way out to the point of what we would call northern Africa. Think about that. These guys are way up in what we would call Turkey, right? They came down to what we call the Mideast, down to what we think of Egypt as the Nile Delta, captured that, went across northern Africa, and now they're just across the sea from Spain and Portugal. These guys are pretty powerful. By the end of his long reign, however, the great Neo-Assyrian Empire was near collapse. Many factors explain this rapid decline, but ultimately one may say the Assyrians were better at building an empire than maintaining it. In particular, the nation of Babylon, which had never completely accepted Assyrian supremacy, began to assert yourself. Remember? We talked about that earlier, how the Babylonians and the Assyrians, we'll get along. Okay, these Assyrians are pretty powerful. Okay, let's play this little Game of Thrones and tolerate each other. So they're like, wait a minute. See, the Assyrians, very good at taking armies and wiping out their enemies and conquering them. But you got to kind of hold your territory. And I don't know if you've ever played the game of Risk. I love that game. I had a friend of mine that when I was doing one of my internships, 4 of us, all young guys, I couldn't do this now. We would start playing at 7 o'clock at night, and at 5:30, we're finally done playing. And the whole point was we would come down to, whoever won the world. Now, actually, we didn't, because my friend Daryl and I, the other 3-4 guys, never figured this out. We would kind of have silent agreements that we're going to take out everybody else. And then at the end of the game, because we both had to go back to work, we'd count up of whoever had the most armies won. And the other guy's like, are you going to fight against each other? Nope. They couldn't figure out how all of a sudden, Daryl's route, he's destroying this territory. And all of a sudden, Brian's over here just, why are you attacking me for? Hey, you're a victim. So this is what was going on. The Assyrians were very good conquering. They were very good hanging on to it. And guess what? The Babylonians, way up here in their border, sees all their armies over here. Let's go in here and invade. So we start to see how the Babylonians popped up. Assyrians' preoccupation with eternal matters allowed the new king, Josiah, to assert his independence. In 628, his 12th year, according to 2 Chronicles 34:3, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the pagan high places. While this was surely a religious action, it would have made also a powerful political statement. Manasseh had shown allegiance to the Assyrians by worshiping Assyrian gods. Josiah's return to worshiping Israel's God was a declaration of independence. Think about that for a minute. You look at 2 Kings 22. Josiah, a young king. Maybe we figure about 12 years old when he assumes the throne. His father and grandfather appease the Assyrians, adopt their culture, adopt their religion, and then they'll leave us alone. Josiah, no. We are God's people. We are the children of Yahweh. We are the heirs of the covenant that God gave. We're going to stand up. Not only did he say we're going to stand up, but all these Assyrian gods and all these Assyrian altars and all these Assyrian temples and all these Assyrian, cultural references, they're gone. They're not Israel. They're not Judah. They're gone. I think that made the Assyrians. What, you little spout of a country, you little tiny territory, you dare to disagree with me? You dare to throw, because again, I believe that there was, it doesn't really say here, but I believe the Assyrians had little camps of guys. I believe they had, tax collectors. I believe they had administrators, and all of a sudden Josiah said, "Out, get out, or I'm going to kill you, one way or the other. You're no longer Assyria's vassal." So then, what does he do? Let's just do that. He does a great reform that he instructs the priests to start do something. Look at the treasury. See, the people still were bringing in their gifts, bringing in, their monetary gifts in the temple. There was great riches in this temple, and the purpose of that was to pay the priests' expenses, to pay for upkeep. But the money had never been taken out of the treasury for centuries, and the temple was falling apart. And Josiah looks at it and says, "This is God's temple. This is God's home, and we're allowing it to fall apart." He looked at the priests and said, "You guys have a job. Take that money and go refurbish the temple, rebuild, and go throughout the nation and teach people." Because again, centuries of people who probably were not taught, didn't really do the practices that they should have been doing as Hebrews, of children of Yahweh. We are going to go back full bore to God. And here's something unique. The state that it was. If you look at 2 Kings 22, and I want to read to you the whole thing. So at verse 8, Hilkiah, the high priest, said to Shaphan, the secretary. So the secretary would be like, the most powerful, most influential advisor to the king. Think about this for a minute. As I read this. The high priest says to the secretary to the king, "I have found the book of law in the temple of the Lord." I found? Think about that for a minute. Diane, you go to Pastor Tammy and say, "Hey, Pastor Tammy, I found the Bible in the back closet." Not a Bible, the only Bible in the building. That's what that verse is saying. The high priest. Think about that. That's how far these people were from God. The book of the law. What we would call the Torah, the first 5 books. And then the high priest reads it for the first time. How can you be the high priest? Don't get us started on that. Don't get started on that, Pastor. Move on. So he gave it to Shaphan, who read it. And then the secretary went to the king and reported to him, "Your officials have paid out the money that was in the temple of the Lord and have entrusted it to the workers and the supervisors of the temple." Okay, cool. King probably thinking, finally, somebody's doing what they're supposed to be doing with that money. Oh. Then the secretary informed the king, "The high priest has given me a book." And he read from it in the presence of the king. Why do you think he said that? Okay, this is still early in Josiah's reign. And his father, his grandfather, certainly weren't even Hebrew in a way in their actions. Remember his grandfather, sawing prophets in half and, all this nasty stuff? Didn't say, "Hey, we just found the word of God." He just said, "Found this book, and I thought maybe it'd be interesting to you." He honestly didn't know what the king's reaction could be. That you go to the king who has literally, again, keep in mind, the power of life and death over you. Doesn't matter if you're the priest. I think he approached it very the same way as Nathan did to David. Remember when David, was, let's see what I want to say. When David was approached about his sinfulness with Bathsheba, okay, God said, "Go, Nathan, go. You know, said to Elijah, go tell Ahab, stand against Jezebel. Okay, cool. Hey, could we sit down? Let's have a cup of coffee and Pastor Tammy. Let's talk about some stuff I'm not too happy about. No. When the guy literally can look over at his chief bodyguard and say, take his head from what he hears. So the high priest goes, think about this a little carefully. Hey, king, and let the word create the reaction. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robes. In the tradition, when you tear your robes, you are in great grief. You are mourning. When a loved one dies, it literally means you're rent. You're so angry. You're so grieving. The king, in all his splendor, on the throne, he hears the word of God. Does he get angry? Yes. He's angry because they've forsaken God. Did he kill the priest? Say, don't want to hear about this anymore. Burn that book. No. He realized that even all the things, taking that money from the treasury, removing the Assyrian gods, that wasn't it. That all this covenant, I believe that they were reading the covenant. And Abraham, I wonder how long he listened to this. But from the beginning, who God was to the nation of Judah, Josiah hears these words the very first time, and it radically changes his life. We believe probably at the most his 20s. So he probably had reigned like 8-10 years with it. 8-10 years. Think about that. Again, you're over the people, the children of Israel, the people of God, for 8 to 10 years. And he was raised. The other thing is, the unique thing with Josiah was he was raised by priests, by religious leaders who didn't know. They knew of God. They knew we should be doing something to God. But they didn't know God. Okay, start. So the king says, go inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all of Judah about what is written in this book and what has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that burns against us, because those who've gone before us have not obeyed the words of this book. They have not acted in accordance with written concerning us. We have a heritage. We build on the generation before us, and the generation that comes after us will build upon that. Josiah realized we're heading down the path that Israel. Maybe a little slower, but we're heading down there. The reason why I believe that it was the covenant, because again, remember the covenant that God said, if you do these, I will do this. But if you refuse to do these, I will do this. And the nation was not doing their part of the covenant. And God had every right, like Israel, God had every right to abandon his people. But for whatever reason, other than God's grace and God's love, he was preserving Judah, even though they weren't 100% his. They were trying, they were doing something right, but not totally right. So what happened? Josiah calls the people to Jerusalem and says, in essence, just like oh, I just lost them. Abraham's, or not, Moses' successor. There's a book named Joshua. At the end of Joshua's life, remember? He gathered all the people of Israel together. They were United Nations. He said, choose this day for who you shall serve. Josiah, in essence, does this to people. And then says, the right choice, the only choice we need to make, is we need to go back to God. And what does God say? You go to verse 18. Verse 18, I'm sorry. 2 Kings 22. This is God speaking. Tell the king of Judah, this is what the Lord God of Israel says concerning the words you've heard. Because your heart was responsive and you humbled yourself before the Lord, when you heard what I have spoken against this place and its people, that they would become a curse and it would be laid to waste. And because you tore your robes and wept in my presence, I have heard you, declares the Lord. Therefore I will gather you to your ancestors, and you will be buried in peace. And your eyes will not see all the disaster that I'm going to bring on this place. Not the answer they wanted, wasn't it? I think the answer they wanted is, I'm going to stop the curses. Remember we talked about the blessings and the curses. God said, oh, you humbled yourselves. You repented of your sin. Okay, cool. No more consequences. Nope. Keep in mind that repentance, confession, we have forgiveness of our sin. But sometimes there's consequences of our sin, whether it's on our own life, physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, or on other people's lives. That's the thing of sin. That, we need to, not adopt this Western idea that we're all individuals. And when it comes to our spiritual life, that if anything else keeps you from sinning, realizing what you do may affect your family, may affect that person that you're ministering to, may affect your community, may affect your church. Certainly we know it will affect your relationship with God. Yes, God will forgive you. God will restore you. But the consequences are great. So, what happens during Josiah's time is a great, great spiritual reform. But 2 Kings 23, 26 through 27. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah, because all that Manasseh had done to arouse his anger. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah from my presence, as I removed Israel. I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple, which I said, my name shall be there. Even though the people sought God's forgiveness, even though they restored the temple, even though they started reading the book of the law, even though they started celebrating the Passover and the festivals and restored the sacrifices, even though they did all this stuff, the consequences of their sinfulness had gone too far. Judah will meet its destruction. God will no longer call the nation or the temple his earthly home. But didn't they confess their sins? Didn't they return to God? Yeah. Though we escape judgment over the guilt of our sinfulness, this is called condemnation. Though we escape condemnation of our sinfulness, our sinful actions, unfortunately, have great consequences that will follow us negatively, and again, not only affect us, but others. And it had gotten to the point where God's children and their relationship with God had gone too far. that yes, during Manasseh's lifetime, or not Manasseh's, Josiah's lifetime, this would not happen. But eventually, God would allow Judah, because of its past sinfulness, to be destroyed just like Israel. So the whole point is, don't forsake God. Period. All right, so next week, again, numerous scriptures here we have. Jeremiah 1 through 4. Jeremiah 1 through 4. Nahum 1 through 3. 2 Kings 23. And then 2 Chronicles 25 through 36. The 28th. So Jeremiah 1 through 4. Nahum 1 through 3. 2 Kings 23. 2 Chronicles 25 through 36. All right, let's close in prayer. Lord, in this world that we live in, it's easier to do what is wrong in your eyes than to do what is right. But Lord, we claim your name. We are your children. And we know we need to do what you want us to do, the right thing. Give us the power, give us the will to do that every day. In your name. So Nahum 1 through 3. Nahum. Did you get the 2 Kings 23? 2 Kings 23. And 2 Chronicles 25 through 36. 36. And I have got to run because I'm being farmed out.